You're in prison, unjustly accused and condemned for a crime you didn't commit. Your best friend comes in and they say, I've bribed the guard and I've found a way for you to escape. The best thing for you to do would be to run away with me and live your life as a free man because you don't deserve this fate. What do? That's the situation confronting Socrates, a real historical person, in many ways the founder of Greek philosophy, about 2,400 years ago. Unjustly accused of impiety, basically terrible injustice, by the state of Athens, he was condemned to death to drink hemlock. He's waiting in prison, and his friend Crito, another older man, probably around 70, comes and tells him, you should just go into exile. Go to another city-state. We've arranged everything. Me, your other friends, will pay whatever it takes that you can live a good life. In fact, Crito says you should do this. It's not right for you to let Athens kill you unjustly. You're not going to be able to take care of your kids. How are you going to raise them? How will you still practice philosophy? He's very distraught. So what does Socrates do? Well, I want to tell you that when I was 14 years old, this was the text that we're discussing, the Crito, that converted me to philosophy as a way of life. Everything that I've done as a philosopher, everything I'm doing now, including the Plato Project, which is a project to bring Plato to the world and to get everyone, I hope at least 1 million people this year, reading Plato together. We're going to read through all of Plato's works, and I'm going to teach them every week. This is the third part of the Plato Project, and it's going to bring a movement of people pursuing wisdom. So if you're already studying Plato, wonderful. I hope you'll share this with your friends. It'll be helpful. Get some people together, study Plato, join the project, check out the work at samuellongcar.com. So this text I found in a CD-ROM encyclopedia under the heading philosophy, which I was interested in, and it's very short. You can read it in probably 20 minutes. And in it, Socrates gives Crito his answer. What does Socrates do? Well, we know from history, Socrates was executed. He did not escape prison. And what Socrates does in this dialogue is truly extraordinary. Even though he is absolutely innocent and he's unjustly condemned by Athens, he argues it would be impious, it would be unjust for him to escape prison. And he tells his friend Crito, look, let's talk about it as philosophers. If you can persuade me that I should leave, then I'll leave. But if we can't find any good reasons to show that I'm wrong, that it would be unjust for me to escape prison, then I have to stay. And he argues with Crito, and he shows with rational arguments that even though he was unjustly condemned, it's right for him to be subject to his fate. Why does he do this? And how does he have this calm, this equanimity? I was so struck as a young teenager by who this person was who argues why he should suffer an unjust death and that it would actually be wrong to try to escape it. I was so impressed by the nobility of mind and the calmness of spirit that Socrates had. And I wanted to know what made him like this. And the answer to that has been the story of my life's work, which is to understand how it is that philosophy, which was originally a transformative way of life, very much like what today we would call religion, but also connected to what we would call science, how it grew and developed, and why it was that more people didn't know about this extraordinary practice that is accessible to anyone of any religious or spiritual tradition or scientific or non-spiritual tradition, and it brings all of us together in pursuit of wisdom. So in this discussion today, I want to lay out 3 basic points that Socrates makes that are extremely influential in the history of philosophy and political thought. The first is that we owe a debt, that we're in a state of an implicit contract with our city-states or our families if they're relatively free. So we're going to talk about what it means to have an implicit contract and how, secondly, patriotism, in a very real sense, is defined by Socrates. He doesn't explicitly talk about what we call patriotism, but essentially the whole dialogue is about what do you owe your political order, what do you owe the state in which you were brought up. And then from that, we'll get to the deep existential question of why it is that there is a mystery in the Crito that is rarely discussed and yet is the key to the dialogue. It's the key to the defense of piety and it's the key to Socrates' contribution to political theory. So let me start first with the idea of an implicit contract. If you're an adult, and particularly if you're in business, you respect contracts. Many people act as if, contracts are not important, but contracts make up everyday life. You have a contract if you have a house or a rental apartment, and it's very important that both sides keep that contract. So I'm not going to argue for the validity of contracts. If you don't believe contracts are valid, that's fine, but I'm not going to defend that here. What I'm going to defend is this fact, and this is well known to the historians of political philosophy. Socrates in this dialogue actually gives one of the most compelling defenses of the idea that we have an implicit contract. Here's his argument. He says, Crito, I have been raised in the state of Athens my entire life. He says, I've never left the state. I didn't travel, even though I could have. And if at any point I had disliked the state of Athens, if I disliked the laws of Athens, if I disagreed with them, I could have basically voted with my feet and left. And I didn't leave. I didn't leave all of that time. In fact, Socrates faithfully served, as he was required to do, in a number of military campaigns, very courageously. If you're interested in that, check out Armand Angor, professor of classics at Oxford University's beautiful book, Socrates in Love. So Socrates did faithful military service to the state of Athens. He was a good Athenian citizen. He never left. And so part of his argument is, I could have left at any time and I didn't. And therefore, I've showed that I want to receive the benefits of the state of Athens. So one component of his argument is, if you can leave a place and you don't, you can't later say, well, I disagree with the customs and laws of this place because now they inconvenience me. Basically, the idea is, if you don't like something, you can do something about it, and you don't, you're implicitly affirming your consent to those conditions. So this is a very interesting idea. You don't have to agree with it, but I want you to think about it. The idea is, if you can leave a circumstance and you don't, you're implicitly affirming that those circumstances are something you give your consent to, that you're not going to violate them if suddenly they become inconvenient for you. Specifically, if you disagree with the laws of, say, your political context, and you are free, is a crucial part, you're free to leave, and you don't, then it shows you are giving yourself to the state in a contract that implicitly says, I agree that you have the right to enforce these laws because I am remaining here under them. That's only one part of the argument. The second part of the argument is very interesting. It's more specifically the argument, you could say, from Piety. He compares the state of Athens to a parent. And he says, just because your parent does something wrong to you does not justify you in doing something wrong to them. In fact, this is a basic principle of Socrates. He thinks it's never wrong to harm another person, even if they harm you back. It's essentially a very early version of what Jesus teaches as the golden rule, the idea that you should do to others what you want them to do to you. But Socrates is more specific. He says, even if a person harms you, you shouldn't retaliate with harm, because it's never right to harm another person. And so even though the state of Athens is wronging him, and that's important, he recognizes he is being wronged, he doesn't think it's right to retaliate to the state of Athens, because he says the state of Athens is like a parent. It's raised him. It's given him all of his benefits. It's educated him. Its customs have protected him and in many cases blessed him. And he, per the first point, could have left at any time. And because he didn't, and because he does receive all these benefits, just as you can't betray your parents or harm them just because they maybe act unjustly towards you and make a mistake, that's Socrates' values. It's traditional value of piety towards your parents and ancestors. He thinks you can't leave the state of Athens now that he's 70 and they've made this bad choice to condemn him just because they're wrong. And this is a very powerful argument, and I want to connect it to our contemporary circumstances. Many of us today, I think, have mixed feelings about what is patriotism. And I think Socrates defines here the basis of true patriotism, which is loyalty to the law. It's loyalty to the legal structure of your society, or what we might call the Constitution. So Socrates imagines the laws of Athens coming to him and basically interrogating him and asking him, why are you leaving now? You could have asked for exile instead of the death penalty in your trial, and you didn't. You could have left at any point in time, and you didn't. You could have, he says, tried to persuade the laws to change, and if you don't, then what right do you have to complain? So basically, if you can persuade your legal system to change, and you don't, you can't complain about the legal system you live in. If you can persuade the people who control the Constitution in your society to change the Constitution and you don't, then you're responsible to submit to the conditions of the Constitution as you have it. So today, many people want to change their legal system in whatever country they are, including America. They want to change the Constitution. In principle, they have a right to try to do that through their elected representatives. The key point is, if you have a problem with your political system and you can change it and you don't, Socrates' point is it would be unjust then to complain about that system or to seek to destroy it. Because the specific argument that links the argument against leaving the state of Athens to the argument for, you could say, patriotism as loyalty to the law, not to my country right or wrong in the sense that you defend your country by not admitting it's wrong. Socrates admits, it's a premise of his argument, that he shouldn't be in this circumstance. The laws have been misapplied to him. And in some ways, the laws weren't totally good. You shouldn't have a capital trial in only one day, for example, for a defense. He mentions this in the prior dialogue, his defense speech, the apology. But that's the situation he was in. And even though he didn't get the outcome that would be just and that he would have desired, he believes that just as with your parents, he has a contract of loyalty that piety demands that he submit to Athens' ruling. Otherwise, he would be destroying the laws just because you don't agree with the way they're applied to you. So that idea that to break the law when you disagree with it would destroy the rule of law is a very powerful third component of that first argument, and it's what leads to the defense of what I'm calling Socratic patriotism. Socratic patriotism is not loyalty to your country where you don't admit its flaws. It's the opposite. If you have flaws in your country that you see, you have a responsibility to try to change them, or you should not complain about them. And if you can't change them and you can leave, and you think they're so bad that you shouldn't be subject to them, then you have an obligation to leave. Otherwise, again, you shouldn't complain or try to destroy the legal system if it turns against you. So this is, in a way, a very serious case. You don't have to agree with it, but I would suggest thinking through it, talking through it with your friends or people you can argue with. We'll be talking about it this Sunday. For the Becoming Human members who join the Plato Project, we talk about the dialogues every Sunday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's the argument, essentially, in a brief nutshell, as it were, for why it would be wrong to escape a fate to which he was unjustly condemned. It would be wrong because he's in a contract with the state of Athens, which has given him many benefits. And those benefits include particularly the rule of law. And Socrates' defense of the rule of law shaped the tradition of the Roman legal system in the Code of Justinian, for example, all the way up into the modern Western legal system. So this is a very powerful idea. If you don't believe in the rule of law, if you believe that just because you disagree with the application of laws, you have the right to destroy your legal system, you are, Socrates says, arguing for chaos. You are seeking to destroy the law simply because it's imperfect. And I would suggest to you that Socrates' argument is hard to get around. No system that humans have devised is perfect. But a system of law that has many aspects of justice is much better than a system of no laws in which there is no justice. And so Socrates, because he's on trial, he was put on trial for impiety. His argument is, no, I shouldn't leave. It would be actually impious. And therefore the pious thing to do is to be subject to a fate that I don't deserve. So ultimately, Socrates' own arguments on behalf of the state of Athens, in spite of its error in condemning him, is the ultimate testimony to his own philosophical mission to embody what it means to be a just human being in spite of the circumstances around you. This is such a powerful case, and I think it's the kind of patriotism we need. Criticize your country by all means. Seek to persuade your leaders, if you can do it, to change. If you can leave your country and it's very unjust and you desire a more just country, seek to leave your country. But if not, then you must participate in the fate, as it were, of your system. Just as you don't get to choose your parents, if they've benefited you and you're a good child, even if they've wronged you, you should still seek to honor your parents. And if you don't agree that you should honor your parents, you don't agree that you should honor the city-state or the political system that's benefited you, that's okay. I would then just ask you to consider what you would feel like if you provided an extensive amount of benefits to a person from the time they were born all the way to the time they were, an adult. And then suddenly they said, I don't like what you're doing to me. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps you're making a mistake. Ask yourself, what does all of the benefits that you've given them, what does the fact that they've maintained their relationship with you positively the entire time, what obligation does that put on them? I think you would feel like they owe you something. Even if you're making a mistake, they owe you a kind of respect. They don't have the right to destroy you just because you're making a mistake. And this is a very deep point in our interpersonal relationships. Oftentimes we'll find we're wronged by someone. And when we're wronged by someone, our desire is naturally to retaliate and to wrong them back. Socrates wants us to think about what is owed by justice to ourselves and our relationships, not just with the state, not just with our family, but with everyone. A just person is a hard thing to become. We have to practice it, and Socrates is an example of it. It's not often convenient or always convenient for us, but it's the right thing to do, at least in Socrates' own case. So that's his argument, and that's his defense of what, again, I'm calling Socratic patriotism. The idea that you should submit to the rule of law and improve the laws as best as you can, or if not, seek a better legal system in which to be a member. But to attack the rule of law is the ultimate act of an unpatriotic person. So patriotism is not the defense of a particular individual or a particular country in spite of its injustice. You could say, wasn't that what Socrates is doing? No, Socrates is simply saying it would be wrong for him to leave. It would be wrong for him to break the law just because the law has been unjustly applied. And so he recognizes that the laws are being unjustly applied, and that gives him an incentive to critique the laws. And indeed, the dialogue Plato wrote about the circumstance, in a way, helped reform not just Socrates' own legal system and Plato's legal system of Athens, but it's helped shape the subsequent development of all other legal systems influenced by it. So that's, I think, a very needed form of philosophical or Socratic patriotism. It's a defense of the goodness of the law in principle and the need to submit to the rule of law, particularly if we want to improve the rule of law. If you want laws to be better, you have to, in principle, support the existence of laws. If you want laws to be destroyed, then you're the enemy of any just legal system, because any just legal system requires submission to its laws in principle. So that's the argument of the Crito for why Socrates actually says, no, I'm not going to escape prison. Would it not be the right thing to do? I could not practice philosophy because for me that means practicing the inquiry into what justice is, and I don't think it's just to escape. So I would be a hypocrite. And that leads finally then to this very great mystery, the mystery that I think haunted me as a teenager, even though I didn't understand it at all. I wasn't a scholar. I didn't know the things that I now know, having studied philosophy and religion professionally. But here's the great mystery. Socrates is waiting to be executed because he can't be executed right after his trial. And the reason is his trial occurred the day after the beginning of a festival, a very important festival for the god Apollo, who is the very god that commissioned Socrates, as he understands it, to practice philosophy. So philosophy for Socrates is a divinely mandated mission. to discern whether or not he is just and wise, and to help his Athenian citizens, fellows, know whether they too are actually wise and just. The god Apollo had a major festival associated with the island of Delos in Greece. So this was called the Delian Festival. And the Lesser Delia was they sent a ship that celebrated this is a myth in Greece, although they thought it was true. And it may have been Theseus saving a bunch of Athenian captives from the monster, the Minotaur. So Socrates can't be executed because during the Delian festival for Apollo, you can't have any ritual impurity, and executing someone is a form of impurity. And so Crito comes because he hears news that the ship is coming back, and that signals Socrates will then have to be executed. And inside of this space is literally the whole mystery of Socrates' life and death. That he was commissioned by the god Apollo, who was the god associated with law-giving in Athenian society. And he defends himself in court by saying, this is what I was told to do by the Delphic oracle from the god Apollo, to practice philosophy in the way you're condemning me for. And so in condemning Socrates, the Athenians are actually condemning the god Apollo and the oracle of Apollo that said Socrates was the wisest person. And Socrates is a pious servant of Apollo, and therefore in his own mind that means he's a pious servant of justice and the laws. And so the mystery underlying this dialogue, and in fact these four great dialogues, the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and the next dialogue we'll discuss, the Phaedo, which actually recounts Socrates' death, his last moments, his last day in prison with his students, his disciples. All of it is in the context of one of the great festivals of Apollo, a festival associated in the stories with the end of the need to sacrifice a bunch of Athenian young people. So the Delian festival has an association with the end of human sacrifice. Socrates voluntarily submits himself to, you might say, a human sacrifice for the state of Athens, voluntarily out of his piety to Apollo. And this links the circumstance of Socrates to, of course, you might say, a very religious theme. The idea that one person, by submitting themselves to an unjust fate, calmly and for good reasons, ends up having the power to change those circumstances, even you could say through their death. And this is part of the great mystery of the association of Socrates' life and death with the mysteries and religions of the Greek city-state, and particularly the god Apollo. Apollo is associated with the reform and the improvement of law in Athens, particularly through the Delphic oracle, and associated also with the abolition, as I said, of human sacrifice. Socrates, you can therefore read as perhaps the last sacrifice of the Athenian state, the last unintentional human sacrifice. By attacking Socrates, they're attacking their own greatest source of justice and wisdom as they understood it themselves. Their loyalty to the god Apollo, their loyalty to the great lawgiver and the great illuminator of the Greek people, because Apollo was uniquely important to many of the Greeks, the Ionians specifically, but also the Athenians. And so Socrates is faithful to the very last, to, you might say, his great God, which abstractly you could say is the rule of law, of reason, of justice, but specifically to the god Apollo. And there's many things more we could say about that, but I want to leave that with you for a later discussion. And I want to thank you for joining me on the Becoming Human project today, and I hope that this brings a little more light, wisdom, hope, and truth to your life, that you'll like the video, share it with your friends, join the project. It's just $10 a month to get access to all my intro to philosophy courses and to come to the courses on the Plato project. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful and just weekend.